This is really exciting, and welcome to the first roundtable that RED, the Research, Education and Development Learning Cooperative for Social Change. My name is Caroline Holmes and I'm one of the co-founders of RED, and my colleagues you'll see around the screen, you've got Tracy Walsh, we've got Fenella Porter and Scylla Ross, and our colleague Ian, who sadly can't be with us at the moment. He might pop in later. As Tracy said, he's dealing with a grievance for a member this morning. So we are the founders of the RED Learning Cooperative, and we're really excited to be running our first roundtable. And we're also really excited to see you all here. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come along and be part of this event. This is just great, and we're really excited to have you here, to see you here, and we want to hear what you've been doing. And we sent out an invitation to you with just various different ideas on there, and I'm going to go through those in a second. But I just want to go through and do a little bit of tech, just talk about how we're going to be structuring this really. And actually it's going to be a very informal structure. On the invitation we sent out, we said that this isn't going to be about presentations, it's really about having a conversation, and we asked you to think about a few things that you perhaps might want to share with everybody around some of your experiences, and I'll talk about those in a second. So the first thing we need to say is we are going to record this because we would like to put it up on our RED website. So we're hoping that you're all okay with that. If you don't want your cameras on, that's absolutely fine, because we understand you might not want your cameras on if it's being recorded. So please feel free to turn your cameras off. If at any point you need to say anything, or you can't hear, or you want people to speak more slowly, sometimes I can speak too quickly, then please do ask us to slow down. Put something in chat. We can see everybody, which is absolutely brilliant. So just stick your hand up and say, you're speaking too quickly. I didn't quite catch that. Could you say that again? It's really important that we all feel comfortable to participate, to listen and to share, because we're here to do both those things. And it's really important everybody feels comfortable to do that. So this is an event that's been put on as part of Co-op's Fortnight, which some of you may well be aware of, and some of you won't be aware of because you're not involved in co-ops. And that's really why we've got you here, because we know some of you are in kind of formal co-ops, workers co-ops. We've got John from Mondragon. We've got other people here who are involved from, in formal co-ops like ours. But some of you will be involved in working kind of in other areas, but whose values are linked to co-ops. And this is why you're here, and this is why we want to talk to you really, and we want to hear what you've got to say about those values, and I'll talk about those in a second. So Co-ops Fortnight's running for the last 2 weeks. Tomorrow is the International Cooperative Alliance International Day of Co-ops, and it happens on the first Saturday of every July every year. The theme for Co-ops Fortnight this year is Keep Cooperating. And yesterday, Co-op College launched a manifesto, and Tracy and Scylla were involved in that, as were Ian. And it was recorded, I believe, and I think the link is going onto the Co-ops College website, and it will also go on the RED's website as well. It's a manifesto for decent work. And I think from what I can gather from the conversation this morning, there were about 100 people on the call. It sounded fascinating. Sadly, I wasn't able to be part of it, but I'm looking forward to seeing the recording. So please do look at the recording if you have the time to do that. Today, as I've said, is not about talking about any kind of formal things around co-ops, and it's about exploring the links and the relationships really between co-op values and trade union values. And I just want to talk about what those co-op values are, just to kind of refresh ourselves really, and for some of you who may not be familiar with them. So all the co-op values, the co-op values that I'm just going to pick up on here, of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity and solidarity. These are the kind of the core co-op values. And of course we've got the ethical values there as well, around honesty and openness, social responsibility and caring for others. And of course we know these as trade unionists. We also know these as cooperators, because the values are very similar to the Nolan principles. And the Nolan principles are the principles that many trade unions work by. I had written them down here, and yet they're here. So The Nolan principles are very similar in terms of transparency and accountability. The Nolan principles are the principles that were developed around the kinds of principles that people should have who are working in public life, and they were developed by a government committee, and lots of trade unions work by those very principles. So what we've asked you to do today, and we're hoping that you've come with some ideas and you've come prepared to share some of your experiences, because we're going to be handing this over to you in a moment. I'm going to stop talking, are to discuss some of the challenges that you've had, particularly around applying some of the principles, trade union values and co-op principles over the last few months, some of the challenges that you've had in continuing to try and apply those principles. Any examples of good practice that you might have as well would be really useful to hear from you. And I just wanted to kind of kick off really before handing it over to you and saying, you know, please now start talking and sharing. I want to look at two principles that have kind of come to light really over the last few months for me, particularly in the work that I do. And one of the things that I do is I run trade union training programs for various different unions. And obviously over the last three or 4 months, like many people, we've had to completely change the way we deliver and approach our learning and our teaching. And one of the things that we've had to do is overnight learn two things really. One is we've had to learn new technology, and the second we've had to think about, well, how do we continue to apply the principles, particularly around democracy and solidarity, which are the two key principles that I've really been challenged with over the last few months. How do we continue to make sure that those principles are applied in the work that we do? So one of the things that came to me about 2 months ago, and it's a bit of a revelation really, was that I've been spending so much time worrying about tech and worrying about how the technology works and about how I get used to kind of seeing people, talking to people in this setting. I'd really kind of forgotten about the democracy of the classroom. I'd really forgotten about student-centered learning and ensuring that students drive the learning and that the democracy of the classroom kind of remains. And this has been a huge challenge for me, and I know for many others who are working in trade union education who have a similar kind of pedagogy around student-centered learning, students driving the learning and us facilitating the learning. And this has been a huge challenge. And the other challenge has been around solidarity, which has been looking at how solidarity and what solidarity can mean in the setting that we're now in, and how we can apply those principles, but apply them in a different way now. So what I'm really talking about here is, you know, how we can encourage members to stand together more broadly, how we can help members to develop networks and create more kind of networks based on solidarity, not just within trade unions, but beyond trade unions, and to create those links and those networks beyond that into other areas of the workplace, into other areas of the community, to try and develop more cohesive solidarity networks, if you like, to try and challenge the current situation that many of our members and workers are finding themselves in. And one of the things that I found really pleasing actually as a response to some of the situations that many members and workers are finding themselves in, is that workers' trade unions are kind of cooperating, are coming together to do joint webinars, to do joint training sessions, to have joint discussions, to kind of share their practice and to help people to deal with some of the challenges that they've got. And this kind of sense of solidarity has really, these platforms that we're working on now, has really helped to kind of consolidate that and help to kind of spread that. So this has been really interesting to see how this new type of solidarity has kind of started to manifest itself in this new online setting that we're all living and working in. And this was really my starting point in terms of looking at co-op values and trade union values that I want to kind of throw out there now, because now I've said my bit, I'm going to shut up. I've been talking for at least 6 minutes, and that's more than enough. So I'd like to hand it over to anybody now who'd like to talk about anything linked to some of the things that I've said, or anything else. It doesn't matter. So please, who'd like to go first? Anybody like to indicate? Can I see a hand up anywhere? Sarah, is that you?
Never slow at coming forward.
Whoever'd like to come forward.
I'll come. Can I?
Would you like to introduce yourself first, Nigel? Just say who you are, and then please do carry on.
Sure. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's Nigel Carter. I'm based here in Oxford. I grew up in Nottingham, but I'm living here in Oxford. So I know Zara, and I know Tracy, who are Oxford residents as well, and been active as a community activist. I've worked as a community development worker, as it said on my bio, but more recently I've been active in Oxford with a group called Oxford Community Action, and I'll just sort of hopefully give a couple of examples of how this group, this network has come about in terms of solidarity and sort of like the cooperative values that underpin this network, and as a way of sort of like, you know, just helping to get the discussion going. So first off, I'll just explain very quickly about who Oxford Community Action is. So it's a collaborative organising space which was established in 2019 by a coalition of new and emerging multi-ethnic community groups in Oxford. And these community groups are made up of community associations like the Eastern Community Association, the Syrian Community of Oxfordshire, Sudanese Community Association, Nigerian Community Oxford, Swahili Community Oxford, along with volunteers, community volunteers from Oxford, Somali, Palestinian, and Eritrean communities. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. And so the purpose of Oxford Community Action is to promote community development, equality, and social justice by enabling and supporting new and emerging Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community groups to overcome barriers created by structural inequalities. And so the principles that this network sort of like tries to work by are very much as a multi-ethnic network. It works very much on the basis of self-organization. So self-organization by community volunteers, and then applying sort of like community development principles like communities taking leadership, developing a common vision, using a community assets and collaborative approach, all of which sort of like align with cooperative principles. And I'm just going to sort of try and very quickly give some very recent examples of good practice in relation to the theme of cooperation in uncertain times. So one of the key things that we're doing at the moment as Oxford Community Action is one of our examples of practice at the moment is COVID-19 response for new and emerging communities. And this response, it came up as a development of an emergency food distribution service, which is based at City College in East Oxford. And this started providing emergency food packages initially in May, every Wednesday in May, for 40 families. And now, sort of like we're in July now that's expanded to providing emergency food packages for over 300 families from new and emerging communities in Oxford. And the basis for this was that the network identified that there is sort of like a barriers to the groups within the community groups within the network. So these are new and emerging community groups in Oxford accessing the mainstream emergency food provision. And so this kind of as well, this kind of links to sort of like, you know, the public health socio-economic backdrop in Oxfordshire. So obviously you've got in relation to Black and Asian and minority ethnic communities, certain social determinants of health. And so in Oxford, what we've, you know, within our network, within Oxford Community Actions network, it's a network that's inclusive of migrant workers, many of whom have been furloughed, made unemployed, and some of whom are also essential workers who are often not receiving the Oxford Living Wage. So the Oxford Living Wage is £10.21 per hour, but most of the members and most of the volunteers, community volunteers within our network, don't receive that Oxford Living Wage. And most of us, I mean, Zara and Tracy in particular will know how expensive Oxford is in terms of like rents and mortgages and just the general cost of living, you know. So that was a key sort of like barrier stroke social determinant of health in relation to sort of like providing the emergency food packages. That's the kind of background context to why we responded with that effort. And again, also as well, it's important to note that many members of the Oxford community are refugee refugees and asylum seekers, some of whom have no recourse to public funds. So in a situation where they financially they can be quite destitute as well as isolated within the local community. So in terms of harnessing cooperative principles in uncertain times, just to illustrate how Oxford Community Action's emergency food packages demonstrates cooperative principles, I'm just going to read very quickly an excerpt from our blog. So it's the Community Action blog, just giving an update on the emergency food provision. And the heading, the blog heading comes under the title Stronger Together. And so the excerpt says, quote, Sophia is our food distribution organization, have been an excellent support for us, increasing the quantity of food packages to our centre on Her Street, and thanks to City College Oxford for this venue, and the Oxford Food Bank have allowed us to collect multiple times to support our network. We've also had tremendous support from Oxford Mutual Aid. But the biggest help came from the community champions that helped to reach out to their respective communities to find out which households we could help, collect the food for distribution, made the necessary preparations to help distribute the food, and organize a whole host of volunteer drivers to deliver their emergency food packages, discreetly taking into account the nuances found within diverse communities. So that's just a sort of, an initial example of sort of like, a response based on cooperative principles, based on solidarity between different communities. So you've got about 7 or 8 community associations with lots of members, lots of individuals, lots of families across Oxfordshire coming together, working together as a response to the COVID-19 emergency situation. And it's fantastic to see how everybody is just like working together on a cooperative basis. So I've got other examples, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Great, that's fantastic. Nigel, thank you. It's so nice to start off with actually seeing some of the principles in practice, excuse me, from an organisation that is not a formal, on paper documented as a co-op or a trade union. And I think, as Caroline said, that's why it's so important to think about the values and principles of cooperation as something that potentially, I think, when you were talking about, from an economic perspective, Nigel, that maybe, is cooperation, rather than just being something that we do, is something that challenges the current status quo. Is cooperation able to challenge the capitalist model and move us forward into something completely different? Again, those are sort of maybe things to think about. So I wondered if anybody else had any other examples of what cooperation looks like in practice, particularly if you're not like Nigel's group, you're not part of the formal cooperative network or a trade union. What about those other groups in between that sit in that space, where actually the principles of solidarity and equality and democracy and equity are things that you actually just do, maybe without even thinking about it? It's just what your project or your organisation is all about. And can you actually implement those? What do they look like? I'm sort of thinking, I don't know whether to pounce on you, Zara, and say whether, this is a moment perhaps you'd like to come in and just talk a bit about your project.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Hey everyone, I'm Zara. I run the Young Women's Music Project, which a couple of our trustees are here, which is great. Yeah, so the project itself is there as a support network for young women aged 14 to 21. The general gist of it is that we give people access to making music from a young age, but it's much more than that. Yeah, it's a very big project to hold. It's got members over 60 at the minute that are our core group, but then people do move on. But during the pandemic, I've seen lots of people come back who are at a loose end, which has been a great time to be able to support as many people as possible. But yeah, our charity isn't funded very well by government pots of money. Like, we're very self-sustaining, and we have been for a long time. I'm kind of happy about that because it means we're more independent and we don't have to kind of tick box and all that kind of stuff that makes me sick. Um, so what we did as soon as we went into lockdown was, it was a very, very quick turnaround. I think within a week I turned everything online. I'd been communicating with all the young women to just make sure they were okay and safe. And like, one thing that was really apparent to me was that home isn't safe for everybody. It was like a very quick realization. Some of the young women live in homes that are really unsafe. They might have abusive partners or even parents. So some of them didn't feel safe enough to participate in the music making, which was really unfortunate, but we were still there just on the phone to chat if they needed it. Some of them didn't have food. One in particular who has 2 children, no nappies and things like that. So, and felt like she couldn't reach out to food bank. And I think a lot of it was to do with like the difficulty she was having with her partner. So yeah, we acted as like a middle person there, and like spoke to food bank and arranged her getting meals, cooked meals also to her house, which was really great. And then the music side of things and trying to like raise money has been really tough, but also we've been really creative. Like today we've got brand new t-shirts out. We've been communicating with people who create all over the country. So for instance, the t-shirts, they're only available for one day, and the people who print them, it's a women-led print studio in Glasgow, and it's all ethically made. And we try to use people that reflect our values. So the whole t-shirt is designed, it's got women on it, it's like a women-led thing, which is great, from the creating to the wearing. Hopefully it's just, you know, spreading the message. So yeah, we have had to rethink how we teach. So I'm delivering the sessions online, but also we've created we've been in touch with lots of companies that have helped us out. We managed to get 10 home studios for 10 young women that were delivered to their houses, and they're now taking part in a music production course. So I like reached out to a company who are an audio company, and they had more contacts to then people donate time to then teach, and then I just facilitate the online space and then and recruit all the young women. So it is quite, it has been a lot of work, but the results are huge. And we've managed to get the young women creating music and then submitting it, and then us releasing it as an online thing, and people are buying it and creating art to go with it. And it's just a real family sort of atmosphere, the thing that we can hold even when it's not in reality, like, and it's online. You can see that it's inspired the young women also, like through the Black Lives Matter movement. We've had lots of them speak up about their experiences, and some of them have gone on to create their own women's hubs, which I'm just so blown away by. And they're really supporting the community. And the thing is, our project's always held like intersectional feminist views. It's always been at the forefront of what we do. Like the talks and discussions we hold are always with everybody in mind. And I think now that people are having bigger conversations about things, it means that the young women can speak about that, but with the support of the project. So yeah, there's a lot that has happened. I don't know if I've answered the question, Tracy, but I kind of forget because so much has happened in such a short amount of time, and I'm just like on to the next thing. But
yeah, no, thanks, Sarah. I mean, I think it's, again, like with Nigel, really useful. It's really good to hear very practical examples of solidarity, support, and keeping going through an incredibly difficult time. You know, and I think one of the things about the project is, if I remember rightly, I'm the trustee, one of the trustees, I should know, is it says on the website, you know, it's feminism in action. So it isn't just about, as you said, about making music, it's about that wider. Yeah. Thanks, Zara. Sarah, did you want to come in then and continue the conversation?
Yeah, really, because it just touched me around the women's work. So I mean, I won't go into too much about what I do, but I just work with Scylla at the Cooperative College on the international programmes. And we do some research and we also deliver projects on the ground, mainly in East Africa, really. But just to go on that point, really, about women, you know, we did a piece of research on peace, the role of peace building and cooperatives, and just particularly in Rwanda and Sri Lanka, and I'm just really interested in the notion of formality and informality. And I think with cooperatives, you know, it's always the implicit outcomes that we're interested in, especially with women. You know, so women's cooperatives were founded after the genocide, and they actually created these safe spaces to, you know, the focus was on livelihoods. So the main work that we do is the focus is on cooperative values and livelihoods, but actually the implicit outcomes of that were actually forming relationships, forming trust, you know, about the perceived enemy, the perceived aggressor, you know, and actually by forming, you know, the main focus is livelihoods, but the implicit outcome was actually being integrated into the community, that community development aspect. So it's always just really, and it's always around women, really, you know, and I think. And then I'm completely going to contradict myself, which Scylla knows I always do, which is, you know, another piece of PhD research with women in co-ops was that the formality of the cooperatives. So women were formed into cooperatives, which created a safe space, it could create a livelihood. But then it was in Brazil, actually, the challenge was when the women went back to their home, which was very patriarchal, the rise in domestic violence. So I'm just throwing, I don't, it's not particularly structured, but I do think there's also something really, really interesting about the formality of co-ops and the informality of co-ops as well. You know, and I think a lot of really interesting things happen in those informal spaces that are created, because I think sometimes there's loads of challenges with co-ops. They're amazing things, but there's also there's lots of challenges with the formality of it. But in those informal spaces, it can be really rich. So that was it.
That's so interesting, Sarah. And one of the things that I was really interested to hear a little bit more about was how these values show up in different spaces in terms of the international context as well. And I think there's something, Wisborne, I'm very sorry, I don't want to pounce on you, but I would really like to hear more about your work, because I think you do work with informal traders, is that right? And it'd be really good to hear about your experiences, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you, Fenella. Greetings to you, everyone.
Greetings and welcome.
You can hear me?
We can.
My name is Wisborne Malaya. I'm the Secretary General of Zimbabwe Chamber of Informal Economy Association. This organization, we work with workers in the informal economy across different forms of trade. We have the vendors, the cross-border traders, the backyard operators. They are it's quite a huge chunk. And as we do our work, we have one big strength, I think, where we are organized in a very, very smart structure approach. We have what we call territories. And within those territories, they also have their leadership there, which runs the day-to-day events or activities of their respective areas. So as a result, as we speak now, we have covered the whole country, where we have 32 territories. And I can give you an example, say a city like Harare, it's a territory, a city like Blawa, it's a territory. And within those territories, we also have good structures for women, a structure for youth, and a structure for people with disabilities. And all these are workers in the informal economy, and they select their own leadership. And the major part of the work we do is to organize, educate, empower, advocate, and represent the interests of the workers in the informal economy. under the vision of decent standards of living for all Zimbabweans in a stable economy, and the mission of alleviating poverty through transforming informal economy activities into the mainstream activities. So as we operate as an organization, I think in Zimbabwe, the major obstacle we have faced since the organization was started in 2002 is the criminalization of informal work, where at policy level, the government has not seen the importance of putting up policies which promote the activities of the informal workers as part of key contributors to the country's GDP. So the environment has always been a bit of a challenge between the informal economy workers and the government arms. I will straight away jump into the current strange situation we have of the COVID-19 pandemic. And according to our statistics in Zimbabwe currently, 76% of people called workers, they are found in the informal economy. And only that, the remainder, the small percentage, are those who are in the formal setups. And within that 76%, the majority of the people found also are women. And as much as they are working to make sure families survive, children, they go to school, there is also one big issue where majority of such workers, they also live from hand to mouth, which is there are no social security systems in our country which take care of the welfare of informal workers and traders. So we have been lobbying for that over the past period to convince the government to have a new mindset in terms of accommodating the welfare of workers in the informal economy. It has not been an easy turf to travel in, but the current situation, because of this pandemic, has seen our lockdown was started in March, and it was a total lockdown. And along the way, there were some stages which were introduced where some sections, starting from the essential service providers, being relaxed. But one key thing is the informal workers were kept under lockdown over the whole period, to a certain extent up to now, yet some formal setups were now being allowed to work. Yet there was no any incentive from the government to cushion the people to survive during the period. So we witnessed some challenges. A lot of hunger was affecting people, and a lot of domestic violence was also taking place, and other associated challenges. So as an organization, we then made an initiative to try and cushion as many of the most vulnerable. And we covered all the 42 territories where we requested our leadership to identify the worst affected people in those communities. And we did two forms of support. The first one, we did the cash transfer support to an average of about 3,000 members. This was a once-off support. It wasn't much. We just managed to support equal to about $10 per beneficiary. So then we went to the second stage, where we also, the government then simplified the lockdown a bit and gave an allowance for some members of the informal sector to start to trade, but they had put some conditions. So we felt the health and safety was key for them to operate. And we managed to give the support of sanitizers, hand sanitizers and the masks, as well as some thermometers for them to use at their operational places. And we also identified that we mainly work with local authorities in these communities because they are the ones who facilitate the processes of registration of traders. So we have made some partnerships with quite a number of local authorities now in terms of fumigating some workspaces where people operate from, and it has become a daily, as well as also giving some formal announcements to people about how to fight COVID and how to keep themselves safe. We also have one or two challenges which are still prevailing to this day, where some of the communities we serve, they are very, very rural communities. So the access to information in terms of like the WhatsApp communication, it's not very friendly, and you just have to either consider a process of them having information through some, you know, physical attention. So we have developed some posters and flyers, which we have also transferred to vernacular language to try and reach out to those people so that they are also up to date with the current situation happening with the pandemic and the possible measures people have to observe in order to fight and also contain the issue of COVID-19. So I think for the meantime, it will be fine if I end here. I have a lot on my plate to share, but for now I can end here and give others a chance. Thank you very much, Fenella.
That was brilliant. It's so good. And I think what's really interesting here is that we're finding so many links. So I think those points that you're making about the tension between formality and informality really picks up on some of the stuff that Sarah might have been, you know, was alluding to, but also that the importance of those local connections, particularly during this time of COVID, which I think, you know, Nigel, you spoke really eloquently about, but also I think that really speaks to Zara and the Young Women's Music Project, because it is those relationships that have been built up that's so important. So, and I also just wanted to point out that Tracy had mentioned earlier, these are really fundamental challenges to the capitalist economy and the way that has set up all these expectations around the way that people's needs get responded to. But actually we're seeing now a real spotlight on the importance of that informality, those local connections. So thank you so much, and do come back in. But I think there are a couple of other experiences that might really also illustrate these issues. So Scilla, do you want to take over now?
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you so much, everybody. What I feel about, I know I'm not supposed to be talking about this, but what I feel about in this period is how everything's been exposed. I mean, we sort of knew about the enormous, massive inequalities and injustices anyway, but it feels like they've been freshly exposed and people are quite surprised that they're there, or a lot of people are. So what I particularly would like to ask a couple of questions around, I know that we want to ask, I'd like to ask Sharon to talk about radical adult ed and the role of that, but first I'd like to ask John about cooperative livelihoods. I mean, what we are, those of us who are able to work and are in full-time work, clearly we're in very privileged positions, you know, compared to the precarity that so many other people have to deal with day in and out. But I think one of the things I wondered you might like to say something about, John, is, you know, what we're perhaps experiencing in this slight shift and exposure is thinking about a different way of work and organising work and the education around that, because the old models which were in crisis before COVID, you know, that it's almost impossible to imagine going back to that similar scenario anymore. And I wondered if you'd perhaps be able to say something about that from a Mondragon perspective.
Sure. Right. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. I'm really pleased to be here and listening to such a diverse set of examples on sharing, I think, some common visions. I would just like to share a few ideas about the Mondragon cooperative experience. We were talking about whether Mondragon is an experience, a model, or whatever. I believe that it's a real experience, and which as you might know, probably the origin was originated back in 1943, so just more than 75 years old now. And initially it was originated as an educational project. We can forget that. But had a greater ambition, I think, to become a lever for social transformation. right? We are located right at the heart of the Basque Country, in the north of Spain, in a small town called Arrasate Mondragon, right? And now we are the ecosystem of Mondragon COOPs comprise. It's composed by around 120 cooperatives, mostly industrial worker-owned cooperatives, but more than 250 business and organizations worldwide, and just including some 15 research centers, cooperative schools, and a university, cooperative university where I belong to. So the 10 Mondragon cooperative principles are somehow related to 7 ICA cooperative principles. I will just post them here for you, right? So that you can have them present here, right? And those are the ones that you see there. It's open admission and neutrality, democratic organization, the sovereignty of labor, the instrumental and subordinate nature of capital, the participatory management, wage solidarity, intercooperation, social transformation, universality, and education. Those are the 10 Mondragon principles, okay? And let me just describe 3 areas that I consider that are central in our cooperatives in relation to these principles. Obviously, there are more, but I think I would like to focus on 3 of them. The first one is related to the place that we give people in our organizations, okay? And probably the most distinguishing features of worker-owned cooperatives is the fact that we workers participate in ownership, in management, and in results, okay? Which in turn generate higher, in principle at least, higher levels of commitment and identity to the cooperative, okay? The other distinguishing element is the fact that COOPs adopt a democratic governance model and ensure transparency. Just to give you an example about the cooperative university, the faculties of the university are primary cooperatives, where the main decision body is the General Assembly, which operates under the rule of one member, one vote. The cooperative has 3 types of members. We have the worker owners, the student members, and the collaborating members, who are representatives from co-ops, companies, and other institutions. So each member group elect their representatives in the governing boards democratically every 4 years. So that's how the cooperative university governance structure is based. As for transparency, it's probably the cooperatives are very intensive in reporting information, all right? And we have different channels to report information, but those channels, in my humble opinion, is just sometimes are not very efficient in terms of transparency. But I believe that there are some other instruments in place in the management model of the cooperatives, which are much more efficient in terms of guaranteeing or ensuring transparency. One of them is and I heard something similar as well, self-organization and self-managed teams. Management model in COOPs that ensures self-managed and self-organization teams, I think, in my opinion, focuses on and empowers people and ensures transparency. And then the third element is the development of a constructive cooperative culture. I think we devote a lot of attention to that, and it's key. In that sense, the social council present in the cooperatives, I believe that it plays a very, because it provides an environment for members to discuss, debate, inform about any area related to the cooperative. It can be related to the activity of the cooperative, but it can be any social issue that the people can discuss about. So the social council gives you a feel and touch about what the atmosphere and the climate of the cooperative can be. Apart from that, in Mondragon cooperatives, we have adopted a systematic way of measuring the culture and satisfaction of members as well, which in turn, it gives you a much more structured measurement and a comparable measurement of both the atmosphere and the culture of the cooperatives. The second area, I believe, related to the principles is employment and employability. In my opinion, in my experience as a member of a governing board and executive board of 2 co-ops, the management model of the cooperatives balance or have a sustainable, at least encourage sustainable balance between wealth generation and employment generation. So wealth generation is not conceived without employment generation and vice versa. Okay, there is the issue of creating sustainable quality employment as well. And also all areas related to health and safety, ensuring a healthy and safe work environment is also key, which requires a lot of training as well for members. And finally, the issue of employability. We need to take into account that members are for life, and cooperatives need to survive and constantly adapt to the new changes that are facing in their activities in society, and therefore it's important that cooperatives provide the necessary skills and training to cooperative members for those employment opportunities that will be generating in the co-ops. And the management model and the managers also need to take that into account. And finally, just the third area, which I consider that it's the most powerful one in cooperatives, is intercooperation. Okay, Mondragon is probably known worldwide because it has been able to create. I'm not too sure whether it's an alternative to capitalism, but at least it's a globally competitive ecosystem based on a strong solidarity mechanism. And I firmly believe that intercooperation and solidarity have demonstrated that they encourage great resilience to economic cycles, and we have seen that in the last crisis, and we also see that in this COVID crisis. Intercooperation is not just conceived as a differential factor in terms of a practice of solidarity, but it's also intercooperation is conceived as a differential factor in business terms. And in fact, Mondragon has established some common solidarity schemes, like the wage solidarity, where the highest paid cooperative member cannot be paid more than 6 times the lowest paid cooperative member, for instance. But in terms of business terms, Mondragon has also established some intercooperation structures, governing structures, where cooperatives in the same activity area come together and they establish some business intercooperation rules as well. And on top of that, there are some other examples like learning forums, which are very important also among cooperatives. And related to the informal cooperation examples that we saw there, I think we do not understand in the cooperation just within the ecosystem of Mondragon co-ops, but we establish networks and alliances outside with other social and business agents as well. And in fact, I can see that since our co-ops are very rooted in our territory, many informal networks are supported by cooperatives, and I would say they're more than the government funding. These informal networks are supported in most of the cases by the cooperative formal structure. So I think in that sense, there's a connection about how a formal cooperative structure can also be very supportive of some informal structure.
Thank you so much, John. It's I mean, it's just fantastic. My heart always is so excited when I see in your principles the sovereignty of labour and the subordinate nature of capital. It's always going to thrill me. I want that on my tombstone when I die. But thank you so much for that overview. Really, really interesting. And I'm just wondering if Chris and Tish, you know, thinking about your engagement in labour and work and those relationships, whether you might like to come in and comment or share some experiences of your own around what John's just said, and if you would just introduce yourself, if you'd like to both make some points.
I'll come in here now if that's okay. Not quite as connected with John as you're hoping, but I'm going to make my contribution at some stage, so it might as well be now. You've called me out. I'm Tish Gibbons. I was a student. Scilla taught me well and hard a couple of years ago at London Met, which is how I've got to know a lot of people here. For a long career in trade union movement in Ireland, and I now head up CIP2 College, which is Ireland's only trade union college, which makes it sound like we're a grand and enormous entity, and indeed we're not. We're 5 or 6 people who double job all over the place, and another 5 or 6 who help us out. So I suppose really that's the way we are. And when I was trying to think about, you know, the contribution and how I might fit in with the rest of you, there's a pre-COVID and a COVID story, I think, here. In terms of COVID, when our shutdown came, you know, it came with 2 days notice. We run our night classes all around the country, 6 or 7 different locations for a certificate program. And we have people who could graduate in autumn or spring if they just could get this last module or 2 out of the way. So unlike your shop steward training, you couldn't just say, look, we'll park it and we'll come back to it when we can. We really had to try and do something. A huge challenge, you know, to try and make our classes able to be delivered online, because they're not lectures. They're probably more like tutorials, but they're very interactive. You know, you do a lot of group work. My laptop is going to end up out in the front garden if I can't get people into groups and all of that. It's just so difficult. And then we have a system whereby CIP2 doesn't allow us to use Zoom, so we have to use Teams, and that's even worse. So with the luxury of 2 laptops, so you do one meeting on Zoom, you close it down, you run out into the other room and you crank up Teams. So we're all trying to cope with all of that. But from the members' point of view, it's been totally horrendous, the whole experience for them. So many of them are frontline workers for a start, or all of a sudden all of the kids are at home, or the supports for minding children have all disappeared. So in terms of trying to get those 3 or 4 hours in the week to attend class and do their work, it's been impossible for a lot of them. And class will out at the end of the day. It always does, no matter what you're talking about. So we have people who don't have reliable broadband. Okay, there may be fibre in their area, they can't afford it. Okay, so they're, you know, using dongles and all sorts of different ways of trying to stay connected, and the system crashes while they're in the middle of a class. We have one chap who does it on his phone, but he has to go out and sit in the car in order to get enough of a signal to stay in the class. So there are all those. I mean, I have the luxury of the home laptop for Zoom, you know, and the work one in the other room for Teams. Some households have one laptop and the kids are trying to do their homework, and there's 2 adults trying to work from home on them. So they don't even have exclusive access, you know, even when they do have the broadband and they do have the machinery. So, you know, it's going to be a long and painful process. We can see with so many people have lost their jobs, and we know that when things come back to normal, that even then we're going to have trouble getting people with paid release from work to do the shop steward training. And even if we try and convert that to some extent, we're going to run into trouble with the statutory bodies for accreditation, because the assessment techniques rely on people being physically in the room and, you know, engaging in mock negotiations or doing safety assessments or that sort of thing. So I don't know how we're going to get around that. So that's just one part of it. The pre-COVID story, and probably in some ways, is even sadder, because we had initially, when I joined the college, there were just three or four tutors left after the financial crash, all based in Dublin, and all members came to Dublin for their training, very often residentials or one day. It didn't work. Dublin's expensive. This is a small island. It still takes an inordinate length of time to cross it from one side to the other, and then you hit traffic in the only big city that we have. So it wasn't practical. So what we had started to do was to, as the union would give me more tutors, was to place them in geographic locations around the country, so that you'd have somebody in the west and south, southeast, and then that they would start building links with the local trade union movement, because we're a bit of a carbuncle out on the side of it, really. You know, we haven't got that sort of, we're not in there, we're not considered frontline, you know. And we started to do pop-up training in the workplace. Anytime we could get in there, we would do it there, or in the local branch offices, rather than always taking everybody out of the system for 3 days residential in a very hallowed, unreal environment in a lot of cases. So we had started to do that and to build links with the One movement, which is, again, it's the trade union movement, but it's trying to expand beyond the trades councils and to work more closely with the community and cooperatives. So we had started to train their activists and had moved to, we were just about to start a pilot project in one rural area where we were working with the several community development companies, I suppose. They're called companies, they're limited companies, but they're funded through community funding, EU community funding. And what they had done was identified parts of the country where the traditional jobs were going, but where the skills weren't there for people to avail of any new type jobs, any more of the modern jobs that were coming on stream or could come on stream. So what we were going to do, what they wanted was to have learning mentors, they were calling them. But that was people in the community who could engage with those who were losing jobs and look at what kind of training might make them able to avail of the jobs, new jobs that were coming in. Now, the Education and Training Board will do a certain amount of that. Really, if you go to them and you tell them this is the training that's needed, they will provide it. But they don't do the training needs analysis, and they don't look at, you know, the skills. They won't do a skills profile of the area. So we were working with them, and we were going to train the learning mentors. And the funding was in place. And you know yourself, trying to get public funding for something like that, it has to fit into this outfit's budget from January to March, and from somebody else's from February to May. So the slot may very well be gone by the time all of this is over, and that funding, you know, may have disappeared. We're hoping, because if we could get this one pilot done, you know, with a lot of goodwill, we might have been able to roll it out in the other areas where we have staff. So that's where we are. We're running from one thing to another, trying to cope with the new situation, and just hoping that things get back to normal soon, and that we can do that, the kind of the cooperative stuff that we really, really wanted to do. Okay.
Well, thank you, Tish. I mean, I've got nothing but empathy for. I mean, I will reveal to this call something I'm telling everyone, which I've developed a new disease, which is called Zoomer's bottom, because I never move from this chair. But I haven't yet had to run into different rooms with different laptops. So gold power to you. Well done for keeping it going. Well done. Thank you. Really useful. I'm going to just bring in Chris, if I may, just to, you know, we're bringing that sort of nice grouping together around that element of work. And then I'll pass back to Tracy, who will go to some of our other contributors. So hi, Chris.
Thanks, Stella. Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Chris Musgrave. I am the General Secretary of the newly formed union, Workers' Union. So, so yeah, we are the UK's newest union. We got listed in March of this year. And I'm one of the founding members, along with my colleague Reese, who's also on the call today. So we are a trade union that primarily is organising paid staff of trade union employers. I say primarily because we have a kind of broader scope than that. We're interested in any organisation that has a link to cooperative principles and trade union values. I mean, as has been established already, the two things hand in glove. So the idea of the union really is born out of the fact that certainly within the trade union movement, we're in relatively privileged positions in as much as many of us have decent terms and conditions far and away beyond workers in the UK. Consistently over the last 10 years, there's been sustained tax on those terms and conditions. So can you hear me okay? My thing's gone a bit funny. I'll turn my...
Yeah, a bit unstable, Chris, actually.
Yeah, I'll turn my camera off. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So yeah, so I was just saying that we're in relatively privileged positions in the trade union movement. We enjoy, generally speaking, better terms and conditions, better salaries than average workers. But over the last 10 years, there's been sustained attacks on those terms and conditions. Below inflation pay rises, moves to reduce pension arrangements, or in some cases remove them entirely, and we're working in an environment where many trade union workers are not members of independent trade unions. I mean, it's an absolutely ludicrous thing to say, but that's the reality. That many unions adopt the old CP line of "my union is my union," so not an independent union, and the unions that the majority of us have been members of historically, for various reasons, are not robust enough in challenging some of the worst practices of trade union employers. So the Union Workers Union is born, and we are steadily recruiting. So at the moment, we have members across 18 different trade unions in the UK, and a growing number of associate employers. I mean, I think kind of going back to the themes, it very much picks up that kind of central theme of decent work and maintaining decent work. We've seen increasing amounts of casualisation in trade union employers, and our kind of central aim really is around combating that, and creating an environment where trade union staff have a robust union to challenge employers. Some of the challenges that we've faced have been around inter-cooperation. So clearly we're viewed as a threat to power and control, which I suppose is partly the point, but disappointing when many trade unions espouse the values of trade unionism and cooperation. So far, none of them have wanted to work with us in any kind of sufficient way. Reece and I have been dealing this week with the TUC's decision to exclude us from Toll Puddle, which for anyone who doesn't know, Tolpuddle is the annual celebration of the Tolpuddle Martyrs, the kind of founding fathers of the UK trade union movement. So, yeah, you know, significant challenges, I think, in even getting a seat at the table, which we're still kind of working through. In terms of good practice, what we're I think one of the spaces that we're looking to fill is around equality, and we have a growing network of women officers. Colleagues may be aware that the trade union movement has been rocked recently with a series of Weinstein-esque allegations against a number of senior trade unionists. So we have Safe Spaces campaign that, you know, again, kind of expanding out that concept of decent work. All workspaces should be safe spaces, you know, for everyone, but particularly for women workers. So, you know, the idea there is around, you know, the real basic principles of self-organization. So, you know, bringing women workers together, discussing the issues, and making recommendations to trade union employers. So some work is going on around Safe Spaces Charter, which we're a signatory to, and we're doing some work with you know, kind of various other colleagues around promoting that. Also, we have Black Workers Network. We see kind of, you know, in quite shocking terms, actually, there's a real underrepresentation of Black trade union officers in leadership positions. I'm working with one union currently who has decided to make a cohort of Black women workers, to terminate their contracts, their fixed-term workers. So we see a higher instance of Black workers in those casual jobs, and I think the gap that has existed with traditional trade union representation of trade union staff is that there hasn't been any forum or space for colleagues to come together around equality, around protected characteristics, and to work on an intersectional basis as well. So there's some real exciting work there as we start to develop. We're still brand new, and you know, kind of keen to work with other organisations and other colleagues. So I would really welcome, kind of outside of this meeting, if anybody would like to get involved in any of that work, or point us to other organisations that you think we could work with. It would be very beneficial.
Thank you, Chris. That's really brilliant. And normally I would really helpful and a great initiative, and especially the Safe Spaces initiative. Somebody, I think it was Groucho Marx, once said, not Carl, said something like, I don't want to be, he got turned down for a club and said, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club I'd be a member of, or something like that. I feel a bit like that when it comes to the TUC. I don't know it's any great problem not being allowed around the table, but the principle, of course, is absolutely right. You know, how the sort of power around these big unions is very, very problematic and unacceptable, as we know. So we're with you on that one. Thank you for that. I'd like to pass over to Tracy, if I may, because we're going to take a slightly different approach. But thank you for that sort of roundup of how we're thinking around work, decent work, in this period.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Zilla. I mean, it's so good to hear everything that's going on here. As I said at the beginning, around what does everything look like in practice, and how can we implement these ideas in very difficult times. Yeah, safe spaces has always been so important, but the idea now that it's come to the forefront and we're all talking about it, we're all talking about how can we make places safe for everybody to be able to say what they feel they need to say and do in a safe environment within, you know, within that framework. And an intersectional approach is, you know, very important. I want to sort of take us back full circle almost to where we were at the beginning, when Nigel kicked off the conversation around what's going on at local levels around cooperation in communities and different examples. And I'd like to be able to bring in Sharon and then Sue on those points, if that's okay. Sharon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and great to hear from everybody. It's been really interesting for me. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to talk directly about local, but I'd like to talk about the principle of local engagement, if that's all right. I mean, I am involved with the local CLP, the local Labour Party, and I'm very involved with the kind of mutual aid networks that have emerged from that. But my principal interest here is really about cooperation as a fundamental principle. So my passion and life commitment is around adult education and lifelong learning. And I'm passionate about the idea that community-based knowledge is the kind of absolutely significant knowledge that we all need to be looking at in this, particularly in a situation of crisis that we're in at the moment. I'm involved in numerous ways. So my day job's working at the University of Nottingham, sometimes a quite beleaguered experience. And Sarah and I have been involved very much in trying to promote adult education. But my particular interest is political, radical adult education at community level. That's what I get up out of bed for. And I'm interested in adult education for social change. That's primarily my interest. So I see that in numerous ways. I see the way it goes wrong often in the Labour Party, in that it becomes obsessed with skills, it becomes obsessed with training, which is not my interest, my passion at all. And I think it forgets completely that people are excited by ideas, and they're particularly excited about ideas that matter to them in their local communities. And I don't just mean who puts the bins out on the potholes, you know, I mean ideas that stimulate and excite people. And we have gone very, very badly wrong, in my opinion, in terms of how that's orchestrated. So I do my bit rather, you know, pathetically, tinkering away in the corners, in that I'm the chair of an organisation called the Raymond Williams Foundation. Not everyone knows about Raymond Williams, but I'm a huge fan of him. And if you get a chance, go and look at him. He was a Welsh academic, really a public intellectual. He was from a mining community, which is close to my heart, as I am too, from Bolsover. And he was passionate about democracy and social justice, but particularly about education as a means for and through social change. So that's really what I'm interested in. The Raymond Williams Foundation is a fascinating organisation, peopled largely by very much older activists who've been staunchly countering every kind of social issue that's been attacking us for the last 40 years or so. Many of them have been very involved right since the late 60s. The RWF itself didn't get formed until the end of the 80s, after Raymond Williams died. But it provides funds for people to engage in adult learning, residential weekends. And more particularly, we've had to go online. This has been our big challenge. I'm dealing mainly with a lot of older people, I've said, and this is not to particularize older people at all as being, you know, not tech savvy, but that is true of quite a number of the members. And it's been about kind of continuing to fight for our the purpose of collaboration. We've come together recently in an online webinar looking at community knowledge, community learning, and community recovery. So how do we use community tacit and informal knowledge and the emerging networks that are coming together, often quite informally, as we've heard, to really force through change. So and counter some of the government monstrosities that are going on at the moment, and also to think about how we get universities to think much better and much more cogently about what the hell we mean by community-based informal learning. They're far too quick to allow it to kind of drop to a very basic level of public engagement without thinking about community research, about community-based knowledge and understanding, and about how we connect the two together. So I'm sorry I've gone on a bit, but that's kind of it. That's it. I'm not so, you know, I can't talk explicitly about local level, but I can talk about some of the issues that have come to my notice around civic and community engagement and using community-based knowledge for change.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sharon. And I think that's so important, isn't it? You know, we are very much embedded in this world where everything that we do, training, education, is all about employability, it's all about work. But actually, one of the principles of us setting up the Red Learning Co-op was to make sure that the stuff that we did was about social change, and it was purposeful. And you know, I don't want to sound like I'm having a go at all forms of education, but there's an awful lot out there that is just very, very I can't think of the word, but it's very much, you know, just put together for certain purposes. And I think we need to have a much broader understanding of that. You know, the old adult education of education for the sake of it, just because you want to do something, is certainly so important. Scilla, do you want to, oh, sorry.
Sorry, just before anybody responds, just to draw anybody's attention, Tracy, there's some really good chat going on. And Sarah in particular has put up a link there about films about how different co-ops meet local needs around the world, and it's really worth having a look at that. But there's lots of other great stuff as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Sharon, did you want to say something?
It's okay, Tracy. I was just
okay. Right, thank you. I wanted to bring Sue in now to talk about some of the, well, as with Sharon, I know both of you wear so many hats and do so many different things, but maybe Sue, you could follow on from that and talk about some of the more recent things that you've been involved in, very much around, you know, democracy at that local level, through politics and through other groups. But I just wanted to, Scilla and I were messaging and saying that we're conscious of the time, and we said we'd finish at 12 o'clock, but I'm just sort of wondering, just throwing this out there, whether people have got another 10 minutes, that whether that's possible, that you just want to throw that, you know, another 10 minutes or so on the end. If you haven't, that's absolutely fine. Go when you need to go. But it just seems such a shame to finish the conversation just saying at 12 o'clock. If you need to go, go. Honestly, we won't hold it against you. And thank you very much if you do have to sneak off. But anyway, Sue.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. Well, as one of the very much older activists, Sharon, where to start, really? Of course, I was really interested in what Chris was saying about union workers, because over my long and varied career, I've researched and wrote about women in trade unions as organisations, so a lot of what you had to say was very resonant. And also, I was going to say to the organisers of this roundtable, can we carry on? Because it's so interesting. And when I was at Ruskin, I used to organise roundtables of trade union women activists and women academics, which was a sort of safe space to talk about some of those issues that have been raised. I suppose the most recent thing, because I worked at Ruskin for many years, and actually I wanted to say to where's Zara there, that one of the wonderful students on the MA Women's Studies in my early days was Kate Garrett, who was, I think, a founder of the Young Women's Music Project. And I'm interested in process, which in a way is what I'm going to say a little bit shortly. But one of the things that is really important in terms of adult education of all sorts is enjoying oneself, and cake. And Kate always used to bring chocolate cake to the Women's Studies group.
Yeah, wow,
so I just throw in cake. I don't have one to show you, but you know, that was always rather wonderful. But in the last couple of years, partly I think through, I'm a local Labour Party activist and was one of the people that set up our local women's group in Oxford in 2010. But I've become one of the organisers of something we call the Oxford Democracy Cafe, which is a place where we meet now on Zoom to examine democracy different forms of democracy. And one of the things that the Democracy Cafe did last year was, there was a lot of, we have different topics around the concepts of democracy, was citizens' assemblies, which have become quite the thing, partly following the Irish example of the way in which citizens' assembly was so effective in the development of the arguments about the abortion, anti-abortion and abortion changes, law changes. And in Oxford, the Democracy Cafe has a subgroup which has developed in its own right called the Citizens Assembly Network, and that was part of the advisory group when the City Council at the end of last year set up a Citizens Assembly to examine the commitment that the City Council had made to the climate emergency. And I mean, there's masses about citizen assemblies. You probably, a lot of you are familiar with the idea, but that it's a random selection, so it's not the same old voices of the powerful making yet more noise, and that's the sort of thing that the Democracy Cafe is interested in. And something else that we did very recently, well, in January, we decided that we wanted to formulate some sort of challenge, if you like, or we developed a manifesto for local democracy, which we were going to ask all the candidates for the City Council elections in May to respond to. Well, those were cancelled, but we did this online, and we in fact got the front page, and I'll hold this up, of the local newspaper on May the 7th, which would have been local elections, and we emailed all the sitting councillors asking them to respond on the 5 basic tenets that we drew up, which was, very quickly, if I got a minute just to say these, work across political parties wherever possible. One of the problems with political parties is the way that they're also tribal, including my lovely Labour Party, and the refusal often to work across parties when doing so would be much more effective. We wouldn't have the government we've got if there had been much more of that. To stay in regular contact with people in their local wards and areas, to represent diverse interests, which has been raised by lots of you, and to ask their constituents how they'd spend their dedicated ward budget, which is a small amount of money, but the councillors rather tend to, I think, decide how they're going to spend that money or respond to the loudest voices, rather than finding out rather more amongst their constituents. And finally, to carry out the will of the Citizens Assembly on climate change. And we do have a website, and about half a dozen councillors did respond, and in fact some responded to the local newspaper, and their responses are all up there. So, and one of the things that people have mentioned in the COVID virus emergency is about, well, the implication is implied that we're hearing new voices, particularly through communities, community groups, and Nigel talked about that in terms of various groups in Oxford. Perhaps, and our next cafe is on July the 11th, and it's about how to get your voice heard. One of the things about the new local voices is, in Oxford anyway, I think in theory every street has a street champion. I think Nigel, you mentioned that, and so new voices have come through at a very, very local level, and we're interested in how to develop some of that. So I guess, you know, there are lots of other things to talk about, but we haven't got the rest of the day to do so. But it's really, well, it's great being here. So thanks for inviting me.
Sue, that's fabulous. Thank you very much. And so to see, you know, somebody's always got to go towards the end, haven't they? But I wanted to say that I feel that we're going to keep this conversation going virtually, but also, you know, this is the start, as Caroline said in the chat. This is just the start. We've been thinking about doing something for a while. We've got it off the ground. We've got lots of other ideas around, you know, maybe you invite a friend or something like that. I know some people have to go, and a huge thank you, adios, muchas gracias to John. But anybody who is able to stay, we'll have another 10 minutes or so, if that's okay. And I'm going to hand back to Caroline, who's going to sort of bring us round full circle and wrap up for us. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And Sue, I thought there were some really, really interesting points there that you made about, which linked into something that Sharon said as well, which is about having a local voice, a local democracy, and about, you know, new voices, I think is really important. And it's certainly something that I've experienced and some others have experienced here because of the new platforms that we're all using. Actually, Access has, you know, there's been an opportunity for us here to allow more people to get involved in some of the discussions that are taking place. And I think some of the points that Sharon and Sue have both said about, you know, exciting discussions, you know, all these discussions and all these new ideas lead action. And that's what's really important about having spaces to have discussions, and having discussions that are radical, that are challenging, and that are informed, but also really importantly, they're more inclusive. So we're allowing more and more people to actually get involved. Sharon, did you want to make a point?
Yeah, just something I forgot to say, Caroline, apologies. One of the things I did mean to say was that one of the expressions of the Raymond Williams Foundation's kind of approach to community and cooperation is the notion of philosophy in pubs, discussions in pubs, obviously online currently, but this very much the idea of democratic, inclusive conversations. It made me think of it when Sue mentioned the Democracy Cafe. These have been going on for years now, and have their own particular structure, their own particular sort of, if you like, pedagogy and approach, and they're very effective. But they're also great at the moment because they're online, because they're actually breaking down these geographical boundaries that a lot of people have found problematic. And you know, people are actually participating just as much online, so people are finding their way through. So you've got that kind of local, national at the moment, and even global, which is brilliant, really. So it's leading to an international flavour to the PIPs as well. So just thought I'd mention that.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Sharon, because we've seen some very practical examples of this in trade unions, for example, where branch meetings that would normally attract maybe 9 or 10 people face to face, and we're now getting 80, 90, 100 people attending, people who have never ever been involved before. So the point around new voices, I think, is really important. The issue around access is important. We need to remember that there are some people that aren't able to get access, because we know, and I think it was through Zara who mentioned at the beginning about people struggling who may not actually have laptops, who may not have phones, who may not have signals. I think, as Chris pointed out as well, you know, and Tish as well, about, you know, there are some issues here that undoubtedly it's not accessible to everybody, but we need to remember that there are huge opportunities here that we can take advantage of, and also kind of broaden those discussions out as well. Sue, did you want to make a point?
Yes, thanks, Caroline. Just to say that our local Labour Party has been doing Zoom meetings as well, and the anxiety about inclusion and exclusion has been discussed. But in terms of inclusion, it has seemed to allow people with disabilities or childcare issues who can't get to live meetings have been able to participate, whereas they weren't before. So there's a real balance, which is never going to probably balance, but, you know, thinking about different and being able to involve different groups is really important.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And Scilla, did you want to make a point?
Yeah, just sort of linking to what lots of other people have said, and I have put something in the chat. I think there's something really interesting happening with local authorities as well. I never thought you'd hear that in a sentence coming out of my mouth, but it is. And there is a Cooperative Councils Innovation Network. It's uneven. You know, some of it is actually probably about saving money, but there are other councils that are pretty radical, are really interested in working closely in co-production in a genuine way, you know, rather than the other awful ways. And you know, Oxford has just joined, for example, and where they are working well, they are really embracing not just voice but activism. Because partly they are the last people standing. They are so shafted financially. They are really struggling. It's needing every morsel of, you know, to keep integrity, to keep values, to keep to them, but to have to make some difficult decisions. You know, it's very, very hard for them, especially when you know many of them are very, very decent. So I think any sort of collaborative work we can do around working with them, particularly around adult and community education, is really, really valuable and embraced. And they are very open to approaches, in my experience. I mean, I'm finding that in Manchester. You know, they're actually open, and it feels to me, as someone who's been around them a long time, more for the first time than I've ever felt that before. It's a very interesting moment.
Cara, can I add on to that and just say you're on mute, but I'm not.
Sorry, I do want to bring Sarah in again before we finish.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's so much to learn.
Yeah, perhaps you could come in at the end, Fenella. Sarah, I really would like to bring you back in because we didn't get an opportunity to hear much from you. And I'd just like you to kind of just bring it back to really some of the themes that we've been talking about. Is that okay?
Of course it is, yeah. Yeah, so I've pinged around there's a really great website that a former colleague actually of ours, Sarah Macari, who's based in Italy. Her and her partner have been going around the world filming co-ops, and it's a great resource actually. And it's basically, and it's just bringing it back to local needs really. And I think, you know, and it'd be good, you know, going forward, you know, doing that local global kind of connection really. But there's some, I just really recommend you going and have a look at some, so like the Bumali Artist Co-op in Australia, which is the Aboriginal Artist Co-op that's very radical, political, and they're producing brilliant art. To the Rwandan rice cooperative that's diversified. It's really, really good examples of how, and what comes out of these examples that the college has been doing for years really is then exploring is the challenges, you know, because there's loads of challenges that those co-ops are facing, and one of them is the people, the passionate people. And I think that goes back, I guess I'm just a pitch really, because one of the questions was around behaviours and values and principles and behaviours. I'd like us to explore that a bit more when we go forward, because it's the behaviours that also form, that create problems, you know, as well, because we're passionate, we've got views, and so how do we, and that's a thread through all the co-ops. What do we have to do to be, you know, because just because we're living to cooperative values and principles doesn't make us good cooperators. So it's just exploring that a bit more as well. So, but I recommend you look at the website because it's a really diverse response to very, very different needs. So it's not just your agricultural co-op, it's the art co-op, it's the bread co-op, it's the catering co-op in New York. It's just really, really interesting. So that's it really.
That's brilliant, Sarah. And actually, I think that's a really important point, because that will take us very neatly on to thinking about how we can take this conversation forward into a next round table. And I think you've just hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we need to be looking at. But it also really neatly kind of brings us to the end of our discussion today, really. And I'm going to ask for any more final points. But I think this issue around behaviour is a really common issue amongst us all, because we all share certain values and principles, but it's actually the application of them. And it's understanding how that application works, some of the strengths and weaknesses of it. You know, lots of people talk the talk, but do they actually walk the walk? And certainly we know, and we have a variety of different experiences here, and we're all nodding, particularly those of us from the trade union movement, who hear all these wonderful values being espoused, all these wonderful discussions about values, principles, fairness, democracy, equality, and all this kind of stuff. But actually, some of the behaviour that goes on is completely contrary to that. Yeah. So I think this is a huge issue, and I think, Sarah, you've really picked up on a really important point here, which I think would very neatly take us on. Would anybody like to make any final points before we finish? Sharon, would you like to?
Yeah, just quickly, Caroline. Thank you. I just wanted to say that given that, you know, the Red Learning Co-op have been so important to me anyway in thinking about the future of Ruskin, it would be great to have more input from yourselves about adult education and union education and the relationship between the two. I mean, Sarah and I have manfully, or valiantly is probably a better way of putting it, tried to work with the Centenary Commission to try and get this issue much better recognised, but it's not always been easy. We've got lovely colleagues, but they're not always in the same ballpark as Scylla and I. And so we've done lots about community-based research to try and influence and improve this connection in the Centenary Commission. But it's an area that really needs developing. And just a quick plug, next week on the 9th, between 2:30 and 4, we've got a research circle event starting, led by the Centenary Commission, but it's trying to get practitioners, academics, people working in communities together actually to start formulating research circles that they will manage at community level. It would be great if some of you were able to come. So have a look on the Co-op website, Centenary Commission, and I'll try and put the link in the chat before we go. Sorry, that was a plug, but I thought it was great. It would be great if people could go. We need that. We need that, Scylla and I.
Can you put that link in chat, Sharon? That would be really useful, because we're recording this, so it would be really useful to be able to share it with people. Thank you. Would anybody else like to make any final points before we wrap up? Because I realise we have gone over very slightly, but we really appreciate you taking the time out to come and join the roundtable, the first roundtable, which we hope of many. Oh, thank you, Sharon. That's brilliant. The links will all be on there. We will collate and summarise all those links for anybody that hasn't got them, and we can send them out to you. That's not a problem at all, so don't worry about writing them down. I think this roundtable has really demonstrated the shared values that we have. There are so many things that we can explore, so many things that we can discuss, and I think hopefully this is going to be the first of many roundtables. We really value your contributions. We really value your ideas about how we can take this forward. So if you do have any ideas of what you would like to see us discussing in roundtables in the future, and other people who you perhaps would like to see invited to the roundtables in the future as well, then please do share them with us. We will send you a follow-up email to thank you with the links. And at that point, you know, we will keep in contact with you. So all that remains for me to say now really is please unmute yourselves, say goodbye to everybody. It's been a pleasure working with you all and seeing you all, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.